Hello and welcome to Develop Your A-Level Teaching. The purpose of this recording is to try and give everyone that wasn't able to attend the sixth form training last year a real overview of everything that we discussed. My name is Jay Lockwood and I will just go through the introduction to the thinking behind the Develop Your A-Level Teaching programme, and then I'll introduce Ed Vainker, Victoria Griffin, Alex Pett, that will go through their slides and their inset just to ensure that everybody is up to speed with the pedagogies that we've discussed. The whole rationale behind the Develop Your A-Level Teaching programme is the historic performance of A-Level programmes in Hounslow. Whilst Hounslow GCSE results have been excellent in recent years, the A-Level results have lagged. And increasingly, there are more and more challenges around these. We have new terminal A-Levels, which I'll discuss in a little bit, vocational qualifications with must-pass external assessment, and new T-levels coming on board, which I think will add a complexity to the A-level market. As you can see, the issues with Hounslow's A-level performance are stark in comparison to the national average. Our performance at the top end is significantly lower, particularly at the A-star to A and A-star to B rates. Also, our no passes percentage is something that's always troubled many school leaders across the borough. 3% of students left Hounslow in 2019 with a U grade. And what I think particularly worries school leaders is that with terminal assessments and no ASs, which have always been a sort of traditional stopping point for many students, this could increase. And the idea of many of our young people at 18 or 19 leaving school with a U grade is something we obviously all want to avoid. ALP suggests that the issue is across prior attainment. It's not simply that we're getting students to do subjects they're not ready for, or that they've overachieved at GCSE. Actually, the underachievement seems to be across all prior attainment bands. Another big issue for Hounslow schools has been Year 12 into 13 retention. And you can see on the slides that between Year 12 and 13, and this is a slightly old figure, but in 2015 to 2016, only 81.7% of pupils progressed from Year 12 to Year 13. So that means about 20% have dropped their A-level subjects or dropped out of college in between Year 12 and 13. In 2014-15, that figure was actually as high as 31%. Again, the role of terminal A-levels is an important thing to think about here, and the vocational courses with the must-pass element, as we think there is an increased risk of learners perhaps staying on courses for longer because they've not done very well in ASs, and therefore they'll get to the end of their A-level courses and again achieve more U grades. So this is something we're really keen to avoid. The other key thing for any sort of Hounslow school is making sure we retain our best students. And too many of our students have traditionally moved out of borough to study at different schools, whether in Ealing, whether in Richmond, whether in Egham. Then we've really got to try and work at keeping our top students in Hounslow and making sure that our Hounslow schools are full with Hounslow students. Financially imperative, but also for the borough. I think a lot of the improvement to date has really been around probably a pixel type approach, which has been around study centres and supervised study. It's been around study skills. There's been a much better tracking in sixth forms in recent years with flight paths, interventions, and as I said, a lot of pixel 6 strategies we've seen in many sixth forms across the borough. However, I think something we've all agreed as school leaders is that teaching and learning is the key to improving A-level outcomes. And the whole idea of this programme is to ensure that all A-level teachers around the borough are having top-class CPD, are having the opportunity to discuss their subjects and A-level issues with other schools across the borough, because also there are many people that have quite lonely departments at A-level teaching, or single A-level teachers, or just one or two. And it's trying to create a real network where we can discuss how top-class teaching and learning can improve Hounslow results and ensure that they keep pace with the GCSE outcomes. The first person talking this morning will be about introducing new knowledge, and he is Ed Vainker, and he's the Executive Principal at Reach Academy Trust.
second of Rosenshine's principles is about the introduction of new knowledge. There are three elements that I'm going to talk about today: practice as you go, contextualize the content, and making sure that your teaching is knowledge organized, not just knowledge rich. Rosensshine talks about introducing new knowledge in small steps. And at our school, we found that practicing as you go along has made a really big difference. In this example, Claire, our chemistry teacher, thought about the way that the prior learning that pupils needed to be able to access the more complex content at the bottom of the page. What she made sure is that for each of these prerequisites, she reviewed them and she made sure pupils practiced before she went on to introduce these more complex elements that were at the core of the A-level syllabus. So practicing as you go along makes it easier for teachers to chunk the content into small enough chunks for pupils to be able to retain it. The second thing I think that's really important is making sure that pupils understand the context. What's the why behind why they're learning this content? So that when pupils, for example, in this history case, are thinking about the first 5-year plan, at the beginning, they're understanding the ways in which they might be asked to apply this knowledge and why this knowledge is really important. By doing that, it gives them greater clarity about how they might use the knowledge and which parts of what they're going to learn about the first 5-year plan are most critical. So we need to make sure that new knowledge is introduced in context. The third criteria is this idea that knowledge needs to be knowledge organized, not knowledge rich. As we learn more about a subject, we build a schema in our heads. That is a way of organizing what we know about that subject. So for our degree courses and the subjects that we've studied in great depth, we have a really clear picture of the way the subject is laid out. And if we get new knowledge, we know where to put it. For pupils in school, to begin with, they don't have that schema at all. And hopefully, through the time that they've been doing GCSE and before that in Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 2, they have the beginnings of a schema for their subject. It's really important that when we introduce new knowledge, we put it in the context that it fits into that schema, and that we articulate and share our own schemas so that students can develop that schema themselves. So when we're thinking about introducing new knowledge, we're thinking about practicing as we go, we're thinking about contextualizing, and we're thinking about building a schema. We're also thinking about making sure that the steps are small enough to make sure they're not overwhelming. We're thinking about how we break down big chunks of information to simplify it. And we make sure that we're checking for understanding through that practice as we go along, and if appropriate, scripting the questions that we're going to ask and potentially which students that we're going to ask. Thank you.
The next part of the programme was all talking about application and how we help students apply the knowledge they've got to exam answers and to longer pieces of writing and or to questions which aren't particularly signposted. You can see from the models slides that I've written here that I've sort of tried to imply there is perhaps a difference between models of everything we're trying to achieve in life to something that is perhaps more realistic, and the idea that the man on the beach and the pink swimwear can become the swimwear models at the top in a very short period of time is probably a little bit naive. And I think the whole idea of those slides, which were probably better explained in person, but was to sort of say that models need to be really achievable for students to see what they're trying to attain. I think a lot of models I've seen in classes over a long period of time have been, here is an A star or an A grade answer at A level, and you sort of hand those out to students that are targeting C's and D's, and the gap is just too big. Another thing I often hear from teachers about models and this sort of reticence in terms of using them is, but they need to be able to do it for themselves. I think the big thing for us is that we believe that all humans need to see attainable success and what it looks like in order to achieve it. Another big put-off in terms of models for teachers is the time it takes. And I think what we're also trying to show is actually there are many, many useful places to start, particularly on the exam boards, which have exemplar answers and a lot of past sort of examination answers, which are really good because they show the strengths and the weaknesses from students. At Logic, we have actually bought every teacher a overhead sort of projector, which, in addition to obviously the laptop and the interactive whiteboard, allows people to model the work as they're writing it. Here is an example from a maths class, which the teacher was able to model as they were writing and going through the exam question. I often use those to even handwrite the beginning of an introduction in a history lesson. Modelling is also about modelling thought, and again, how you can take notes. It's how you model to take notes in a class. Only last week I observed a new teacher, and he stood and talked and said, please take some notes. But unless we model students how you take the notes, or how you reduce big bits of text, and how you recall information and how you reapply it in terms of memory strategies, until we model those, students won't really remember, or you do it particularly productively. Scaffolds really should be seen in terms of helping people reach higher. And again, on the slides, you can see some of the different things, some more examples of how it's used. Another key thing, I think, with models is getting students to model their thinking as opposed to just model their writing. Too often we see in A-level classes, particularly the sort of 2.5 hour, 3 hour sessions, where the last hour is students are writing a long essay or writing an extended piece of work. Actually, it really should be used for how you model your thinking and how you model a paragraph and then check that their understanding is good. What's the point of asking a student to write a long piece of work and which is full of misconceptions? A thing that we like doing at Logic is really getting students to almost write an introduction, which has the sort of introduces the key themes they'll cover in an essay. And that gives you a real idea that they've understood it. You can see where the essay's going, and you can check very quickly that they've understood how to answer the question. I think scaffolding is absolutely key so the practice goes right. And you'll see the final slide I've put there is about the dog taking its owner for a walk. Too often, I think, particularly in extended writing, we have students let the essay take them for a walk and they lose control of the essay. Actually, with good scaffolds and good models, we really must try and make sure that students are really targeted and are able to make sure that if they are doing an hour writing, that it's a really good hour and they're really starting to see success at the end of it.
Since last year's HEP presentation, there has been a lot more written about and celebrated about the benefits of effective review strategies. I am sure we're all in the throes of delivering a broad knowledge-rich curriculum, even amidst the challenges that COVID-19 has given us. Indeed, it's probably never been more important to review prior knowledge in a systematic way that informs our teaching in the following days, weeks, and months. I'll use the example of my Year 12 A-level English class from last year. On the surface, I was lucky to be teaching a room full of bright, keen young people who all complete homework on time, all contribute well to discussions, and are all really good at taking Cornell notes, etc. In previous years, I've always assessed my A-level groups using essay questions and proper A-level grades right from the start of Year 12. Now, in order to assess our students' suitability for courses, we assess them 3 weeks in and have totally redesigned assessments. Now they are made up of 50% recall and 50% application. In this case, as an A-level English teacher, a close language analysis. This was really kind of a game changer for me, and it revealed that even my brightest students could actually only receive 50 to 60% in the recall section. However, what was even more revealing was that 8 out of 10 students achieved full marks in questions 1 to 3, those that we covered in week 1 and have revisited regularly. But 2 out of students achieved full marks in the questions which tested knowledge of content we had covered the previous week, in week 4. I think from this it's abundantly clear that the need to revisit, test and use the results to inform our teaching is needed if students are able to retain the knowledge they need to succeed. The reapply will never get better until the recall improves. So we need to remember that learning is a generative process. Daily, weekly and monthly review activities give students opportunities to generate versions of what they know and understand, helping to strengthen future retrieval of the knowledge involved, build fluency, and identify where they might have residual gaps or areas of uncertainty. Students need to explore their memory to check what they know and what they understand. Even this week, Mary Myatt, who has written brilliantly about curriculum design and implementation, has said that this aspect of lesson and lesson sequence design and this systematic approach to reviewing material is incredibly important for effective learning and more important than ever now. Importantly too, Rosesnshine suggests that the optimal success rate in an assessment is about 70 to 80%. So we need to make sure we're also providing enough space to improve. Planning an assessment is also about pitching it right. As a profession, our shared understanding of the memory curve and reducing cognitive load, providing students with the space to think and apply in exams, not just recall knowledge, because that is already in the long-term memory, should really now inform the way we use tests and create meaningful assessment journeys. So we need to think, have I planned my assessments well? Do my students know where they are going? And is that knowledge fully embedded into the long-term memory before we move on? So daily, weekly and monthly review is essential, not just for simple recall, but also to ensure that we are making explicit links between topics, ideas and concepts. The connections are even more important than the individual facts. Explicit creation of schema is also an aspect of learning, which has probably informed a lot of our curriculum design in the last year or so. I'll demonstrate the way I approach this when teaching a fellow twice a week to year 12. So just a little bit of background on Venice. Venice, in the Renaissance, was somewhere that was simultaneously heralded for its systems of law, order and culture, and infamous for its salacious and morally depraved underworld. In other words, the duplicitous nature of the setting works as a metaphor for the duplicitous nature of the play's central character, or second central character, Iago. Now that's really important because the duplicity and a range of binary opposites which are at the heart of the play are absolutely key in terms of pre-reading when we actually start getting into the text. So I wanted to use in week 1 ideas exploring Venice using the picture and vocabulary that we might use to describe Venice or anything to do with its duplicity. So the students were very, very clear on the importance of setting right from the very start before we actually started reading. So I asked 2 questions. In the first lesson, as their do now activity, what does the picture tell you about Venice? On day 2, what vocabulary might you use to describe Renaissance Venice? And then their homework was to research the wars of Cyprus. The second setting of the play Othello, for those of you who don't know, is the island of Cyprus, which is absolutely vital to understanding the play and the sort of the cultural conflict between the Moors or the heathens and white Western Europe. So when we got to week 2, you can see that the questions start really drilling down into some more specific facts. And I am checking to make sure that the students have understood the research they have completed for homework and revisiting their work from week 1, so they can start making those really, really important connections. You can also see in there that I have an oracy task, so I'm using key command words, why and what and how, followed by explain, to make sure that they are using the knowledge in a variety of ways. In week 3, you can see that I'm starting to develop these ideas using more why and how questions, as well as taking away the scaffold and using this now embedded knowledge to get the students writing. The fact that their recall should be good now means that a 100-word summary should take 5 minutes and not 15, because the daily and weekly review means that the facts are in the long-term memory and you are reducing that cognitive load. So in the months following our study of Othello, I should probably actually just briefly pause and explain why I teach such a difficult text at the start of year 12. And the reason I do that is because all the students coming into year 12 will have studied a Shakespeare play. So whereas it might be tempting to sequence my curriculum with the easiest things first, there's a very clear rationale for why I actually start with this one. They will have some knowledge of tragedy, they will have some knowledge of Shakespearean English. But now what I want to do when we start reading an easier, arguably easier, more modern play, is start making some really clear connections across the genre of drama. So the next play we read in the third term is Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. And this time, the play is set in the deep South America during the 1950s. You can probably already understand from that setting is also incredibly important here. So I activate the prior knowledge. In what way are settings important in Renaissance and Jacobean drama? A few months later, write down the ways Shakespeare and one modern dramatist have used settings effectively. Explain what the similarities and differences are. These are really, really good way of explicitly creating schema for the students and making sure that those sort of central ideas around setting and drama are really, really clear for them. When I get to month 9 and we're revising for exams, I can look at activities like this. Choose 2 characters, one from your Shakespeare text and one from your modern text, and compare the way characters in the text you have studied respond to their surroundings. So at the beginning of the year, when I'm planning my curriculum, I know what my key concepts are. In this instance, it's setting, and I've worked backwards from that in terms of planning my assessment journeys and how I'm going to be revisiting these key concepts throughout the year. So my final message about retrieval practice is really about varying the diet. And you've got a few examples here on the slide in front of you. If you were to simply do sort of one form of quizzing, essentially the students aren't being asked to use their knowledge in any different way. You're not asking them to sort of dissect a question or to really think hard about those facts and start using them in more interesting ways. So it's very, very important to get them to vary the diet. So low stakes quizzing is probably part of all of our lessons on a daily or if not weekly basis. But I think oracy exercises, testing each other in pairs, explaining things in full sentences, using narrative is also really, really good for reviewing material. Carefully designed multiple choice questions, summarising, concept maps for those key concepts that you establish at the beginning of the year, and then of course your reapplication of the knowledge that you have reviewed on a daily, weekly and monthly basis. Thank you.
At A-level, guided and independent practice is hugely important. We move from a situation at GCSE where students are often seeing us on a daily basis to at A-level where they may only be seeing us once a week. So providing a setup for what they're going to be when they're not in our direct control is absolutely vital. I tend to view the course content as being king and think about my teaching time available filling up most of my lesson time. Now, as a maths teacher, I find that the majority of the time I spend in class is running through examples, running through past questions, and really getting the students to understand a new way of thinking. There's actually very little time in my lessons to provide that independent practice. Okay, they may make a start on it, but certainly I find that typically students don't have enough time to really consolidate their learning, which means that area outside of the classroom is absolutely imperative for them to develop a decent understanding of the topics that we're going through. In order to make sure they're best prepared for this, I annotate my lesson slides in class so that I can share them with them after class. I think this is really important, and it marks a clear difference between just sharing the PowerPoint, because the lesson slides are something that you've developed together with your class. And they provide you an opportunity to share your thinking, and they provide students that opportunity when they are outside your lesson to be able to go back and check their notes against the notes that were created during the lesson. All of these resources I upload to Google Classroom, and I am a massive fan of Google Classroom. I think there are some important things that I've learned about Google Classroom. One of those things is creating clear topic areas so that you can keep your work more organised, and it makes it easy for students to then go back and find the relevant information when they need it. But I have a process whereby after every single lesson, annotated slides will then be uploaded for Google Classroom so that students can then go back over that material during the week. I have very rigid expectations of what I expect between lessons, which includes rewriting class notes. It includes answering additional questions which have answers set out for them. It involves creating revision notes. It involves just going through and making all of those checks that I would naturally do as a good student, but at this point in time, they don't have those study skills on board. So creating a set of expectations, which is you will go home, you will redo various aspects of this lesson, you will answer this set of questions here, you will check your own answers, you will then come back with questions, etc., that there's an importance of being very clear about that with your students. And certainly when they come back to lessons, I am checking that they have done that in between. So I am checking the quality of the notes that they've created. I'm checking that they've answered those questions and self-assessed in that intervening time. I tend to find it useful to create templates because it forces me to do the right thing. So at the start of the year, I create a template, which is then thinking, okay, I want to include some revision material or some interleaving topics. So I've got one here that's set up so that I always include the previous topic that we've covered in class. I'm forcing myself to think about differentiation. So every time I'm communicating with the students, this is where you will be if you can answer these sorts of questions. And I'm also thinking that I've got a big focus on exam style questions, so that every homework they're covering something that we've done previously to tick off my interleaving. They've got some sort of independent practice to complete on the work that we've done recently, and they're then being able to apply that in an exam situation. You may choose other forms of interleaved examples. So for example, a last lesson last week, last topic last term, that you then get students to think about, okay, well, here's an independent practice for me to do. I'm going to start off by answering something that we did last lesson, then I'm going to go to look at something that we were answering last week, then something that we covered last topic, and then self-explanatory, you then look at material that they have covered a long time ago, and that really helps to build up within the students a way of reviewing work that they've covered previously. Definitely look at including retrieval practice. It is so important for those students not just to be doing the content that you've covered in that specific week, but to be going back over content that you've covered previously. Remembering that differentiation is important, that you have a range of abilities that you're focusing on in your classroom, and being clear with the students what they should be expecting at every point. So if they are a B grade candidate, they should be able to answer easily and then move on through the rest of the questions that you have set for them. Always including exam material. It's really important to have that focus right from the start so that students can understand the importance of applying their knowledge. It's one thing to know how to answer the questions in class, it's another thing entirely to know how to answer those exam questions accurately. Pick your questions. Now, I think this is particularly pertinent because when you've got a large A-level class, you don't want to be spending all of your time marking horrendous amounts of work where you really are just going over the same sort of basic bits and pieces. Sure, get the students to answer those independently, but the ones that you want to check are those real sticking questions, the ones that you know that they're going to make the mistakes with. Don't just put in 10 questions and then I'll have to go through and mark all 10 of them. Put in the 1 or 2 that really are going to pick out the key understanding in that topic area. It's far better to have a homework where you're focused on those nitty-gritty points rather than just blanket handing out material that has been pre-created. And most importantly, to be aware of your workload. So when you are setting those homeworks, be aware that obviously you are then going to be the one that is assessing those homeworks. So if you're including lots of material, it's going to take you a long time to mark. So think very carefully about which questions, as I say, are the most important ones for you to then cover in those homeworks. Think about releasing support material. So again, where you may only see students once or maybe twice a week, and you know that they're going to struggle maybe with some of the questions that you've set, you can use Google Classroom to release material at a predefined date. So for example, I may have a question that goes out to students on day 1, and then by day 3, I then release those same questions with my own metacognitive steps, sort of my own thinking explained in those questions. So what you can see here is the sort of material before I've annotated and then after, so that students get an idea as to where they might start that question. That gives them an opportunity to start by themselves, but if they have got stuck, it gives them a prompt then to go back over without you having to physically be there on hand to guide them through those questions. When you are annotating the work, try to make a list of what your thought processes are. So, for example, here in blue, I'm telling the students that I would start by expanding the denominator and then I would use algebraic division, so that I give them that first hint of what I am thinking when I see those sorts of questions. Think about the release point of that material. So when in the week is it going to go out? Communicate that clearly with your students. What is the release mechanism? Is it that it's going to be posted on Google Classroom? Is it that students can pick up an additional help sheet from you on the Thursday after you've taught the lesson on Monday? Think about where that material is then going to come out to the students. How are you going to outline your thought process? What metacognitive steps are you going to give the students? And importantly, be brief. Again, thinking about your own time, but thinking about what the students are going to engage with. Don't spend hours and hours annotating something for them. Just give them a few simple thoughts about ways that they could engage with these questions. Encourage communications at all points. I'm a really big user of email, and I encourage the students, when they get stuck, just get in contact with me. Email me straight away. As soon as you get stuck, email me straight away. And I find that for a number of students where they face that mental block, that they've got to a point and they think, no, I just can't get any further. And they often will spend a long time trying to get themselves unstuck, and sometimes won't progress with work because they are stuck at that point. That if you give them the out, that they can say, well, just pop me an email and let me know the specific bit that you've got stuck on, it helps the student to move on past those sorts of things. They all have camera phones, so get them to take a photograph of where it is that they're stuck so that you can be more explicit about how they get themselves unstuck. Because quite often it's a very simple mistake that they've made, but that's prevented them from moving on with their work with any great pace. So providing them that clear level of communication and normalising that level of communication is really, really important. Get them to send their pictures, encourage the use of emails, encourage the use of Google Classroom. So there is now a feature on Google Classroom where if students turn in a photo, you can click on it to add comments to that individual photo. Indicate to students that you have had contact between lessons. So when I go back into my lesson on a Monday, I indicate, I was contacted by 3 students over the weekend and they said this, this and this. Or I have had contact from students that have struggled with this question over the weekend, so it is becoming the recap. Remember, if you get stuck, please do email me, so that whole idea of communicate between lessons becomes normalised. And absolutely love Google Classroom. It is a fantastic way for organising your resources, and it's also a fantastic way for students to be able to communicate with each other, so they can post their own comments on work that they may be stuck with, and you may find in the end that they are able to help each other get themselves unstuck. So the final things from me, just to recap all of that, is how have you prepared the students for their independent practice? What is it that you are doing to make that independent practice easier for them? Does it review the knowledge and allow a fluency of skill? Are you setting work that is a worksheet that you've used forever, or have you specifically planned very, very carefully the questions that are going to be included in that work so that students really do get the most out of it? Think about how you're going to support and monitor without overburdening yourself. Sometimes responding to that quick email can be the best thing. So rather than then having to go through endless cycles of catching students up the following lesson, that a quick email here and there can sometimes make all the difference.